Savannah Ray, and we have a very special guest. It's Phillip from Arids Only. So we're going to talk to him a little bit today about Uromastyx. They're one of my favorite species, and I know Savannah has a strong appreciation for the Uromastyx as well. So Phillip, why don't you go ahead and start us off by telling some of our viewers how you got into reptiles, and then specifically Uromastyx and some of the other species that you deal with.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, right on. Will do. Thanks again for having me on. I love doing these shows and I love talking about reptiles. So literally always happy to do it. But yeah, so the way I got into reptiles, I think is like, I think a huge majority of us in the herpetoculture field just were obsessed with dinosaurs as kids. And then when you know, the kind of first time you ever venture into a pet store or you hear about somebody who has a lizard or a snake as a pet or a frog or whatever, you kind of freak out and, you know, realize, oh my God, I didn't even know that was an option. And so that was how I got into it as a kid. And then as far as Uromastyx goes, I ended up getting my first one from a pet shop here locally. A Molly, it was a male Molly Uromastyx. And I didn't know anything about him. I'd never heard of him. I'd never seen one. I think, well, I think I've told two different stories about this particular thing. I think I've told this story about the Molly, and I think I've told a story about going to another reptile shop to buy a bearded dragon, and they had a female ornate Uromastyx in the cage with it. And I was just like, what the heck is that thing? So my memory, you know, is probably not perfect on which one of those came first, but it feels like the one where I got this male Molly when I was about 16 or 17 was like the real sort of inception moment, if you will. I got him and I got home and I was researching the whole genus and I was like, oh my God, these are the coolest lizards I've ever seen. And so it just captivated me, and I had him on and off from the time I was about 16 until I was like 23 or so, when I got a pair of Thomasai in a shipment that came in from Europe. And then that pair that I got from that shipment became the first pair that I bred. And then I was just kind of off to the races and went nuts.
That's awesome. I remember the first time I saw a Uromastyx, and it was an Egyptian Uromastyx. I walked into the pet store and there was a couple and they each had one on their shoulder. And I was like, what is this glorious animal right here? And then the more I learned about them, I was like, these lizards are so awesome. I've always been, I guess it's like a snake person. And I don't know if you guys, my phone's ringing and I don't know how to end it. I don't know I can do it. I have it on silent on my phone, but it's ringing on my computer, sorry.
That's all right.
But yeah, the first time I saw it and I learned about them, they were just blew my mind. I thought they were so really special, I guess is the only word I can think of. Because there's just nothing really that I had ever seen at that time like them. And I just, it was such a cool thing because like I said, I've always been into snakes. Like that's kind of what drew me in. But I did start out the same as you, very into dinosaurs. I'm still very into dinosaurs. So.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Totally understandable. Dinosaurs are still badass.
Yes.
Actually, I happen to be one of those people who was like kind of bummed out when I found out that most dinosaurs were actually related to birds, right? So like, you know what I'm saying? I was like, what a drag, man. I was like, come on. You know, dinosaurs are way better. Lizards are way better. I was like, come on. Yeah.
Yeah, they are better. They survived.
Yeah, totally. And then you find out that the dinosaurs that were the sort of predecessors of reptiles were like the least interesting dinosaurs. You're like, come on, man. How lame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is definitely something you hear and you feel, you're like, dang it, I feel that too. I have a similar situation. My first Uromastyx was a Molly, and I had one that was given to me, and then I was looking for a mate and I found one online, and it actually had been rescued from somebody who had kept it with a bearded dragon, and the bearded dragon had gotten territorial and aggressive and bit the tip of the Molly's tail off. Yeah, they were both older, and they both lived to be around 15, 16 years old. But then I was really, and I was really on the hunt for Euro for a really long time, and I always loved an ornate worked at a pet shop and we had baby ornates and they were gorgeous and so cute. They're even when they're little, they look like grumpy old men. And
Totally. Yeah.
I've tried to bug you for years, but I always missed it because it happens so quick. And this is my busy time of year too. So I get lost and I'm like, no. But I bred panther chameleons for years and they were just heartbreakers. They have such a short lifespan. You bond with them and then they pass away, and like it just, like, for the females, especially egg laying, they didn't live very long, and it was crazy to have this huge turnover. And like I'd had, cages sunning outside and come back and, an hour later and all of my baby panther chameleons were literally being eaten alive by ants. I mean,
oh no.
Yeah, it was, and that's years of work. It takes 6 months to 14 months to incubate those eggs. And then you're talking about a 3 to 4 month raising before they're even big enough to sell. And so, I was really kind of heartbroken working with that species and I loved them, but that's really kind of why the ornate was kind of like the best of both worlds when I was like, wow, I get the colors and the coolness, but then I'll get the longevity of a Euro. So I just think that's really nice. That's one thing that I love working with reptiles is their longer lifespan. So that was a disadvantage working with the panther chameleons. But I definitely have been interested in the Egyptians. They've been amazing seeing all of your photos online, and you're getting into breeding season. So how's that going so far?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I relate to all of that, by the way. One thing I want to say before the breeding season thing is I just want to note that I find it shocking that a bearded dragon would even stand a chance at getting the tail off of a Molly. I mean, that to me is, unless there was like a big size disparity, that seems so difficult for you know what I mean? So that's remarkable. That's
it was just the tip of the tail, just the very end of it. So I don't know if maybe he had, like, it was damaged, maybe it fell off. They said that they were the person had been keeping them on sandpaper without UVB. I mean, it didn't seem like it was a good, it was a pretty bad scenario, but I got it from the people that were the rescuers. So
right.
I have a third party story. So
yeah, for sure. I know what you mean. It's remarkable the kind of things you hear about, the way people, when you get a rescue animal and you find out the conditions that it was like managing to deal with in some capacity. It's just crazy. But so anyway, the Egyptians are pretty wild. Breeding season is kind of in full swing or near full swing. So I'm right at the point in my season where the first 2 clutches of Euros have hatched. So the Egyptians, and then the one of the Moroccan clutches has hatched. And then I've got all these clutches kind of hovering in the incubator, and then a small nut, like somewhere around 4 or 5 more clutches left to be laid. And so things are getting real hectic and really heating up. The Egyptians are always a trip because those animals, they, not just because of their size, but because of all of the things that come along with that size of lizard, right? The amount of food that they eat, the amount that they go to the bathroom, but also the amount that they can learn and sort of feel comfortable with, because they're so large, right? Like my adults are so large and still getting bigger. Honestly, they're still growing every year, but they're so large that you can develop a different relationship with them because they don't necessarily see you as big of a threat. And the bigger they get and the more they recognize that you're not going to screw with them, the less of a threat they see you as. And so that can be really interesting. I mean, there's some downsides in the sense that the male, he's pretty territorial, he's pretty aggressive. So he doesn't like it when I get into his cage, or when, if I come to clean up or whatever, he gets pretty grumpy and will try to tear me up if I let him. But once you get a hold of him and you get him out, he's pretty fantastic. But the female, she's just a super sweetheart. I mean, really, really relaxed. She can be just a little bit nervous from time to time, but her first reaction is just to bail for a hide. She doesn't really seem all that interested in biting. She'll hiss a little bit if she's feisty, but for the most part, she'll just sit with you. And I take her out when I go to clean her her cage, and it's really great. They're really wonderful species. The babies hatch out at a massive size. I mean, when you see photos of them, you think, oh, it's not that big of a difference, because the sort of the total body length of, like, say, an ornate hatchling is not that much smaller than the total body length of an Egyptian hatchling, but it's like the sheer weight. It's like the body size, like the bulk of the baby Egyptian is quite substantial compared to the other species. And so they're so fast to learn that you're not a threat, that they become like these little puppy dog lizards, like these just so relaxed. I really can't get enough of those things. They are just really incredible lizards. Yeah.
That's awesome. So if somebody is interested in getting a baby from you, what's the best way to go about that and to contact you?
Yeah. So right now with the Egyptians, there's, I think, something like about a half or 2/3 of them or so are currently reserved, but for people who had been following my Instagram and whatnot, and they, but there are still some left unreserved this year, which is a little surprising to me, because most of the time, most seasons, they sell out pretty damn fast, like within the first week. But it's actually good. It's nice because, so at this point, anybody who might be interested out there can just contact me. They can send me an email, they can DM me on Instagram, whatever it is. They can get a hold of me, and those are available to reserve at any point in time now while they last. And then any that don't get sold, I'm gonna bring to. I'm planning to go to Tinley this year in later on in the fall. So I'm gonna bring Egyptians, and I'm gonna bring ornates, and I'm gonna bring Moroccans and princeps and Taylorii and amii. I'm gonna bring a whole mess of crap. Yeah.
Those crazy tailed lizards. Those are some
Yeah.
gnarly tails they've got. They're so cool.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. Can't disagree there.
So if somebody's getting a baby, because I highly recommend buying a captive bred baby. I've seen some pretty terrible posts recently. There's a lot of farm raised coming in.
Oh yeah.
And when farm raised come in, they come in with a lot of parasites and other health issues and things like that can really kill a baby really quickly. So it'll look like a very healthy baby at first, and then go downhill extremely quickly. But what are some care information? Like, what do you suggest as a general rule of thumb for size of enclosure, heating and lighting? What lighting do you recommend for a baby Euro?
Yeah, for sure. So with the wild caught ones specifically, I recommend that people start them off like the youngsters in like a 55-gallon Rubbermaid tub, because it's not a huge size, but it's not small, so they can adjust relatively quickly to, if you take a wild caught baby and you cram it into a massive enclosure right away, as long as you give it lots and lots of, like, if you give it the perfect setup and you get vet care and all that stuff, then the size of enclosure won't make a huge difference. But for the sake of making it a little bit easier for your new keeper or somebody who's maybe never dealt with a wild caught baby, I like to start them out in those smaller tubs, because it's a smaller space. They'll get more used to that space very, very quickly, because it's a little smaller, right? And it's small, so cleanup won't be a big issue. And cleanup is going to be important with fresh wild caught babies, because if they come in harboring parasites, then they're going to, when they take a dump, it's going to be gnarly, and then they're going to spread it all over the cage, and you're going to have to clean all those furnishings and all of the floor and the walls and anything, because you're going to need to be able to keep whatever internal bug that they're dealing with relatively contained. But within that cage size, I'll start them out on paper towel, just because you want to be able to monitor things like their poo and things of that nature, and keep cleanup easy. In terms of temperature, I shoot for a basking zone of about 125, give or take 5 degrees in either direction, depending on the individual preferences of the animal. Some will enjoy things a little bit toastier, some will enjoy things just a little bit cooler, and then that will change based on the season. So I always suggest that people make an effort to respond to those just respond to what their animal wants, right? If it's basking a lot for long extended periods of time, then you probably need to bump up the temperature. If it's avoiding the basking area, like sitting off to the side of the basking zone, you might consider like adjusting the temperature downward just a little bit. And then as far as UV lighting, obviously the higher quality you can get, the better. I use Arcadia brand 14% T5 tubes. But if depending on what's available near you, if what you've got near you is Zoomed or Exoterra or whatever it may be, that's also okay. But just shoot for very high UV rating, and make sure that you're following the instructions on the box. So if it says on the box, don't put a screen in between this light and your animal, don't put it on the outside of a screen. And if it says keep, minimum of 14 inches away from the animal, don't put it any closer. You're not going to, you can't get like a lower percentage UV light and let the animal get within a few inches of it and expect to overcompensate for it, because then you're going to cause other problems. And then at first, I also just recommend that people keep the diet really simple from the start, because once a Euro is settled and eating and doing their thing, then it'll be very, very easy to transition it into whatever regular diet that you might offer your other ones. So when they initially get in, I suggest people just feed them something super plain like romaine or green leaf lettuce, because these are mild in terms of taste. They may eat this other stuff if you throw in like collard and turnip and all these other really rich foods, but they also might kind of turn their nose up to those because they probably smell a little weirder or taste a little bit weirder than what they're used to. So I like to give them romaine and green leaf because it's a little bit sweeter, and if they're a little reluctant to eat, then those things are going to kind of convince them. It's going to help give them a little extra incentive to take in food. And then the other thing is, a lot of these imports come in a little dehydrated. So if you're giving them romaine or green leaf, then you're kind of increasing the amount of water that they might get from that food source in the first place. Oh, okay. and then also just for your average person, get them to the vet. Like take a fecal to the vet, see if there's anything going on. People get a little uncomfortable doing this because they're used to taking dogs and cats to the vet and spending hundreds of dollars just to get their animal cared for. But a reptile, for the most part, it's not going to cost that much, if at all. It might cost you $100 or less to take them to the vet, to get the fecal done, and to get medication. Especially if you have a relatively decent vet in your area. And then if you can't do, you're going to have to look around. But the vet will be able to make sure that there's not something in the, like some internal parasite problem. It'll make sure there's no external parasite problem. There's no injuries on the animal. There's nothing really to be concerned about. And, it's very, very simple thing to do to make sure that you are avoiding a lot of problems in the future.
For sure. And so when you're talking about varied diets, what are the varied diets that you recommend for the Uromastyx to make sure that they have a complete diet? And obviously, like dandelions are a favorite, but are there any other ones that you felt that were really nutritious, that seem to be a staple that you use?
Yeah, for sure. So, in terms of wild plants, dandelions, I've planted some stuff in my own yard, like phlox, that's spelled PHLOX, and then hollyhock. Those three are just killer because they grow like crazy. They will regrow if you kind of clip or trim them and prune them back. They'll regrow from that. It won't, you get more flowers from wherever you pulled it off. The hollyhock grow massive, and they produce huge amounts of flowers. And that they eat the flower petals from those like it's cocaine or something. So they love that. And then there's another one. There's a weed that grows all over the place called bindweed, BINEWEED. It's just a weed like dandelion that grows all over the US. And it's like a viney type of weed with these little white flowers. Everyone, once you see it, you'll recognize it, because I feel like every person knows what it is because it grows everywhere. And they can eat that stuff too, and they love it. They can eat the leaves and the flowers from that. But as far as like a more standard captive diet, I've gone through a lot of iterations of this over the years, and I've kind of come to a new place on it. So I used to think that whatever you could do to feed the most diverse and nutritionally dense foods as possible was like the best way to do it. So, I was feeding everything from endive, escarole, turnip greens, collard greens, bok choy, radicchio, cilantro, parsley, like just huge, varieties of greens. And then I would supplement with things like, kale, a little bit of kale here and there, spring mix vegetables, hard vegetables like carrots and squash and all these things. And then I would occasionally supplement with grasses, like just wild grass from in my yard, throwing that on the food, getting Zoomed grassland tortoise chow or Missouri brand tortoise food and grinding that up and offering that as a supplement. That's what I was doing for a very, very long time. And even though I still think that that's a good way to go about it, it's probably it's a decent way, and it's one way. I now have kind of changed my mind, and I think that it's probably not a great idea to overload them with these really, really rich foods. Now, a lot of this is sort of based on information about like iguanas and tortoises and other herbivorous reptiles that people have kept in captivity for a little bit longer. So I think people went that route for feeding their Euros. But the more we know, that Uromastyx are a lot like tortoises in some ways, the more it seems like pretty much if you can give them mostly grass, it's probably better. Now, of course, grass isn't really like a useful thing to tell people to feed, because even though there's grass all over the place, most Euros won't really eat just straight up grass, and it's not really something you can buy or you get a hold of in the winter. And I'll explain a little bit about why I've made some of these changes in a second. But so now what I do, a couple of things. I tell people that food availability is going to be really different based on where you live. So, here where I live, which is a suburb of Denver, I'm able to find, I've got like 20 supermarkets in the direct area, and I can find any kind of green, any kind of vegetable that you can really think of, right? So that's great. It's a beautiful thing. But but not everybody lives in a place like that. Some people live in places where they have a single grocery store, or maybe a few grocery stores, but they're very highly spread out. So what I've been recommending a lot of people do is, frankly, just stick to really simple, relatively high water content foods like green leaf lettuce, romaine lettuce, or spring mix, like the lettuces that you can find in spring mix if you take out like the chard and the spinach, and then have that for most of what you're getting during the cooler months. And then when the warmer months come around, try to go outside and collect wild plants. There's lots of great apps and lots of great resources out there that will tell you what foods you can get. And pretty much anywhere you are in the continental United States, you're going to be able to find at least a few wild plants that are very good for, or edible for Uromastyx. Now, it might sound a little complicated for people, but this could be something as simple as picking dandelions from a neighbor's yard or from like some open space near your house. I mean, this really doesn't have to be crazy complicated. But then the other thing I suggest people do is I suggest they go to either tortoisesupply.com or supereuro.com and so both of those different companies make dry flowers and dry plants. So you can get these packages of dry foods, and you can buy them in bulk, and they're not expensive. And that can be something that you have in a bowl. Either you can leave it in there constantly if you like, or if you're like me, you can put a pinch of it in there every day or so and just gauge their interest. And then if you balance out feeding those dry and wild foods with the romaine and green leaf lettuce, I think that this is inevitably going to kind of be a long-term solution for Uromastyx in captivity, because and now I want to get into exactly why I suggest that people do this. The first is that you can order those two brands of dried flowers from anywhere in the continental US, right? Whereas it can be harder to get certain kinds of nutritional greens in certain parts of the United States. Just depending on where you are, it might be difficult. And for those of us who live in big cities, or a place where we can really easily get greens, it might seem a little bizarre, but I can't tell you how often I hear from people who say, I can't get these greens near me. What do I feed my animal? So I suggest that people get those dried greens. And then a second reason is because I don't think that Euros are really equipped to deal with some of the nutritional excesses that you find in those really rich greens. Okay. And so this is one of the reasons. I think this might be one of the things that contributes to, along with other care issues, this might be one of the things that contributes to shorter lifespans, like gout and infections, and in the extremities for Uromastyx, jaw problems, and then gut intestinal problems. And then the third thing in this list is avoid doing anything more than 5% of the total diet in terms of seeds, lentils, bee pollen, and stuff like this. Just keep it very, 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 very minimal, because those foods, while safe, the safety profile of those foods is like pretty much a dose dependent thing. So if you stack on lots and lots of those dry foods, the safety of those foods goes down. So I'll try to keep that part particularly short, but I really want to stress that for people. And then the last reason I made this change is because if you have that composition of diet, which is the dry foods, like these dry, and by dry foods I mean dry plants, dry flowers, dry herbs and hay, grass, stuff like that, mixed with the green leaf and romaine leaf, I think you're going to get a better hydration profile, and something that resembles more of what these animals would get in the wild. Because when we pound them full of these sopping wet greens, we think, oh, we don't keep a water bowl in the cage. We got to keep them hydrated. Well, the reality is, in the wild, they probably wouldn't encounter a whole lot of standing water. So they're going to be really, really good at utilizing this water from food sources and stuff like that, right? But the problem is, there's probably side effects that we are not yet aware of in terms of giving them these super high nutrient dense foods. And then the fact that they're very, very wet probably means that they're uptaking different nutrients at different levels and different velocities that we don't really know exactly how that's going to affect these things long term. So what I like about when I feed diets like this, in conjunction with top-notch care, great heat gradients, really good UV, and then occasional sunlight exposure and wild foods, is all of the animals have a fantastic body composition. So they're not skinny, they're not overweight, and they're like right in the middle. They recover very well from breeding. They have really well shelled eggs. The animals have great muscle tone, and when they poop, it's like a pellet, and it's like not excessively wet. So I really don't like it when my Euros go to the bathroom and they put out all this excess water with their feces. Now, I can't say that that's necessarily a huge problem, but it's just not something I like. I don't like it. It's a lot, and it's a lot of extra cleaning when they do that. So when I feed this way, I do get a little bit of excess moisture in their poo, but not that much. And it's along with a pellet. And then,
so more like a tortoise then.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, just like a tortoise. And then
now I do want to move on to
sure.
You've got a new venture going on with Patreon, but before that, I just wanted to ask real quickly, have you ever thought about sprouting lentils? Like, we sprout a lot of foods at our houses, and at our house, and we found that actually will increase the protein and lower the carbohydrates of a plant, usually in a seed. And then also you're bringing it back to life. So obviously the nutrition is going to be, like you say, it's going to be a wet food then. What do you feel about the lentils? And then I definitely want to move on to your new adventure, the Patreon, because we are running low on time. So I want to get that in.
Yeah, sorry, I can talk.
No, you're good. I love it. That's the best part.
Valuable information.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, the sprouted lentils and stuff, that's great. I don't think there's anything wrong with feeding that. I have done that in the past with my animals many, many times, but I I hesitate because with some of these drier foods, like whether it's lentils, whether they're sprouted or dry, finch seeds, or dry processed foods like reptile juvenile iguana pellets or whatever, all of this stuff is all good food. But the problem is people, what they respond to is the fact that their uro responds to those foods really strongly. So they see that the animal freaks out and loves those things. And so they end up feeding it all the time, right? So that's why I suggest that people keep these things to like 5% of the diet. The other thing is there's really no information out there about how closely the sprouted lentils resemble the foods that they would be eating in the wild. So, I mean, presumably they might be perfect for them, right? And if in 5 or 10 years we find out some random thing that like turns out there's this plant that Euros eat in the wild and they eat a lot of the sprouted seeds and turns out it's just like lentils, then, well, obviously we'll have to change our tune. But as it stands now, we don't have a lot of data on that. And I really just think people need to ease up on that stuff, because I see people feeding those things every day, every single day. And I would say that the best thing to do is to keep that stuff to a maximum of once a week. Like
that's what I've been doing. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Like absolute maximum of once a week. And then if you feed those things, don't feed other stuff. So just that, keep it minimal. And then try to avoid feeding those foods in the off seasons. So like whenever I feed anything that resembles birdseed or lentils, whether sprouted or dry or whatever that stuff, I try to do it primarily in the summer months, the peak months, when the animals are at their peak functioning and they're eating lots of other foods and they're getting a lot of hydration. So they're like really well maintained machines. And I avoid feeding that stuff in the fall, the winter, and the early spring. It doesn't mean you can't feed it. It's just I keep it to a minimum, because you're talking about a time of the year where these animals are already their bodies are trying to do something else other than grow and get bigger and, get a bunch of nutrients. They're trying to slow down. They're trying to rest. They're trying to get ready for the next year. And so if you inundate their digestive systems with all this really nutrient dense, calorie dense, and difficult to process foods, then I think it can be problematic, to say the least.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited. I know Jessica and I were talking about it as soon as we saw it, about your new venture, and I think it's such a great idea. I really like the way you kind of structured it. You definitely spend a lot of your time educating people, and that is on your own dime and time. Time is money. And so I think that this is a great way for people to help support all of the research you've done, not just by buying babies and the breeding, which is also awesome, but I definitely think this is a way for you to continue and really be able to fund, you're doing research basically, on this species, and you're working hands-on with them. So can you tell Jessica and I a little bit about Patreon? We only have, like I said, a couple minutes. We've got about 2.5 minutes to kind of go over what you're doing, and then we'd love to have you back again and talk about it more, for sure.
Yeah, of course. So let me try to condense this. So my Patreon is patreon.com/Arids Only. All of my care information about Uromastyx and other reptiles is always going to be free. I'm never going to put a paywall between my care info and the general public. But people who subscribe to my Patreon get a handful of perks. They get some merch that you can get when you subscribe. They get one-on-one Q&A and help sessions with me, like basically one-on-one lessons on how to do what you're doing. And it's focused on Uromastyx right now, but I'm going to expand that to the other stuff that I work with and eventually try to make it about herpetoculture in general. I'm starting a podcast with a friend of mine called, his name's Roy, of Wellspring Herpetoculture, and it's called Project Herpetoculture. We're going to launch that in the next couple of weeks. And then people who subscribe also get early access, or first access rather, to all of my available Uromastyx. So the ornates, the Thomasi, everything that everybody wants all the time. They're going to get first access to that.
That would save me years.
Yep, I know, right, exactly. And it helps me organize what I'm doing. It helps me keep things a little more straightforward for my sake. And it's just people who appreciate what I do. It's a way for them to kind of I don't know, just give me a tip, because even though I do fine with the reptiles and I get my bills paid and things like that, things, as everybody knows, things only get harder, right? As the more you do and I'm the only one doing all of this stuff. So the facility, as well as all the customer service and helping people and answering questions, it's just me. I don't have any assistance. I don't have any help. So it's just another way for me to try to gain a little bit of help from the community.
That's awesome. Well, we want to thank you so much, Phillip, for being on, and we can't wait to have you back and get a little bit more into this. This is some great care advice that you gave us. And
cool.
We are going to sign up for your Patreon because we want those Uromastyx.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Awesome. Really, really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it so much. You guys have a great day.
Yeah, you too. See you later.
Yeah.